we're not supposed to be conformed to this world. And what we're finding is that a lot of people are trying to are looking more. The church in a lot of areas is looking a lot more like the world.
Yeah.
And it's really it's disheartening to see, but then it's also separating, it's separating the lukewarm from those that are on fire.
Welcome to RCAM. I'm your host, Ryan, and thank you for tuning in today. And today we have Kalvin Payne joining us. How are you doing today, Kalvin?
Doing very well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, glad to hear it, man. So would you mind just introducing my audience to who you are and just tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, father of two, husband of one, here in San Diego, California. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about what's been going on here in San Diego or California in general.
Yeah.
With all the mandates and all that stuff in this season, but just trying to live life, go to church and enjoy just day in and day out,
Yeah. So how's parenthood treating you? I can imagine your hands are probably full.
Yeah, so we have a 2-year-old just started potty training, and then we have a 2-month-old about to turn 3-month-old. So our hands are definitely pretty full, as I'm sure you already are aware of being a father yourself. But
Yeah, I could
things
imagine.
are great. Love it. Love being a parent. It's the best thing that's ever happened to us, and wouldn't trade it for a thing. It's every moment is precious.
Dude, me either. Fatherhood is one of those things that I feel like is just, it doesn't get enough recognition, and more dads need to take on that responsibility. One of the greatest joys in my life is being a dad. I love it. I love it so much. And, I look at my little girl and I'm just, I don't know, like just moved and excited. And she's filled with such, I guess, marvel and wonder in her eyes. And it's just kind of incredible to watch them grow up. And I'm like, how could dads not want to do this? How could dads not want to be involved?
Right.
It's just
And if they just got it, there's a lot of people that, never got that chance, never got that opportunity. Maybe they walked out beforehand and never actually got hands on. But once I don't understand it. Like, just even from the moment, my first son Arrow was born, just my life changed. I couldn't fathom not being in the picture. I couldn't fathom not being so hands on. And it blows my mind that even that crosses some people's minds. I understand totally being freaked out about parenthood and being a father and how much responsibility comes with it, but it's the best thing that can happen to a man, aside from getting married.
Yeah, and it really just, it challenges us to grow as men and as providers and as protectors. It's just kind of just a beautiful thing. So you mentioned just kind of the mandates in California, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that today. So
Sure.
how are things going in California? So obviously I have my perspective, and the media will report on what the media reports on, and I want to kind of hear it from someone living there. What's it been like?
Yeah. So kind of like backtracking to the beginning of the pandemic. I don't really love using that word, to be honest. The whole 2020 season, just in general. When everything started, everybody was freaked out. Nobody knew what was really going on. So we wanted to take proper precautions. And so we did all of that. We stayed home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, so to speak. And that turned out to be what a lot of people called conspiracy back then, which is that they said they were going to continue to extend these policies. They're going to continue to extend these mandates. And we ended up seeing that here in California. From what it seems like, most of the other parts of the country are pretty normal. But here in California, we have like a constant battle against, mask mandates. And, a lot of people might think it's trivial, but if you give an inch, if you give the more you give, the more foothold you give, the more of your rights are giving up. And so definitely a big thing here in California. We're seeing a lot of states come back. We just had another one instituted last month, and then Governor Mussolini, we call him, has extended the mask mandate another month. And it's no fun to be here in California while all this is going down, but it's also a really great responsibility that we have in our hands to be able to stand up against that. So I myself am not wearing masks in any establishment, and what's really cool to see right now is now that a lot more of the truth is coming out here in California, that we're seeing that people are adopting it. People aren't really respecting these new mandates that are coming back out, and they're telling you to stay inside, they're telling you to mask up everywhere you go. People aren't really respecting it, and it's cool to see businesses actually adopting that, because you'll walk into a business and expect them to tell you to put a mask on, but most of them are not anymore, which is really really interesting to see. Other than that, California right now it's beautiful. We enjoy the sunshine weather, and they say good vibes all the time. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that's going on right now, and I guess I don't know what you guys see from the outside looking into California, but what we see, they kind of keep it surface level of California. They don't really show you what's going on outside on the news, because they don't want you to know it's normal.
Yeah. So I follow some people that lived in California, actually, so I'm a huge fan of the Daily Wire and the work those guys do. And they recently relocated out of California. And then recently they had, what is it? I'm trying to think. Larry Elder running against Gavin Newsom. And unfortunately that didn't go the way that most people had wanted it to go, or at least from the outside. And then another person that I follow, Dave Rubin, he moved out. So these are kind of the primary sources that I'm listening to about how things are. And at least in LA, they were describing not really going out anymore, and a lot of things being closed down. Businesses that were formerly open just couldn't survive it. And that's something that I've seen, in New York. I just recently left New York, but I seen that happen. Businesses, that open, that were open during the pandemic, 2 years later or a year later, they're out of business. They're done, and they're not coming back. And that was kind of disheartening to see. And I imagined it was probably very similar in California.
Yeah, absolutely. And it like you said, it is unfortunate to see businesses going out of business, whether they started before or during the pandemic. And a lot of that, I wish some of the businesses had stood up a lot more firmly against the mandates. And as a business owner, your primary source of income comes from your customers, comes from your clients. You're not getting those people in the door. Where's your money coming from? Excuse me. And so when the government is telling you that you can't open your business, or you have to have XYZ amount of restrictions, that's impeding you from operating to the best of your ability, there has to come to a point where either you stand up or you fall down. And a lot of businesses, and churches for that matter too, have fallen to the wayside because they weren't willing to do that.
Yeah, and actually, that's something I wanted to talk about. So, I'm curious, how has the church fared in California in light of all these, restrictions?
Yeah, I can speak for our church, and then I can speak from what I've seen happening. Just kind of, at least from what a lot of other members have come to our church and told us. You're not going to see a lot of churches admitting that they're closing down, a lot of that stuff. So that kind of just goes under the radar and is very hush. But what I've been noticing is that a lot of people have flooded our church recently, and the reason being is that at the beginning of the whole 2020 season, we shut down as a church for 2 weeks. Right, that's what they told us to do. We shut down for 2 weeks. We wanted to be responsible until we figured out what the scope of this whole thing was.
And I think most people were willing to do that. I was willing to do that.
Right.
I think most people, it was we didn't know what we were dealing with. We didn't know, how deadly it actually was. We didn't understand a lot about it. So most people were more than willing to do that. I know I was. And, but as time passed, it's like, okay, wait a second. This might not be as bad as we're making it out to be. And some of this stuff doesn't make a lot of sense, and things aren't adding up. So we stopped that.
Exactly. No, and it's you're cautious at first, but then you're also cautious where you're getting your news from. And I want to honor my pastors that they stood up, and once they noticed that something wasn't right, they opened the church doors again, and they said, "Hey, we've seen too many people affected by this." Not so much the virus itself, but more so the lockdowns, the mandates, the mental and spiritual effects that can come from everything that they were trying to mandate us to do or not to do. And what we noticed was there was a lot of, there was a few suicides in the church, like from the congregation that just had no community, because we're forced to just, communicate over the phone or FaceTime. And a lot of people that were starting to go back to drug use or things like that. And so, we have a heart for those people, and we want to see them in community. And it's very difficult to do that when the one thing that is supposed to keep people together is told that you can't do anymore. So what we noticed was that when we opened our church doors again, we lost a lot of people. Honestly, a lot of people did not respect the fact that we were opening our church doors again, and they came against us for it. A lot of people were like, you guys are killing people, you're killing grandmas. You've heard it all.
Oh yeah, I
And
definitely heard that.
we said, hey, you know what? There are people that are hurting. There are people that are broken. There are people that are still looking for God, and they're not going to, it's not impossible to find God in your home, and Him come into your life. And but it makes it definitely a lot more difficult when you can't be in community. You can't learn about Jesus. And we definitely saw that a lot of people came against us. But what happened was since those people have left, since those people kind of, decided that, they wanted to wait this out, those people, whatever happened to them, we noticed that all those people that we were praying for, all those people that, we were believing were there, that were hoping for community, that were wanting to find relationship in Jesus, they ended up coming to the church. And our church has never been bigger, more on fire for God, and charismatic. And we're like, we've just created this explosion or revival, in San Diego, from our church and a couple of other churches in the nearby areas, like Orange County. There's a church there that's doing the same thing. And when the people rise up and they stand against things like that, they stand for truth. We're noticing big shift here in San Diego, in California in general, even despite a lot of those mandates and lockdowns. And I would say that because we are doing this, because we have taken a step to be active in politics, we're noticing that a lot of those politicians, a lot of those people that are trying to enforce these mandates are backing down. They're moving deadlines. They're removing things that they said that they were going to do, mandating and all that good stuff. So it's really interesting to see.
That's encouraging, man. And I've some of what you talked about, I firsthand saw. So I was responsible for a supported housing program in New York. So my job was to help people, who are homeless or at risk of homeless get into affordable housing. And a lot of those people, they were attending rehabs and they're involved in some community programs, and all that got shut down during the pandemic. And we started to see our clients just do really poorly. I mean, it was just heartbreaking. Clients relapsing, domestic abuse go up, just all sorts of awful things happening, because they had no outlet, they had nowhere to go, nothing to do, and they're just sitting in their apartments alone and isolated and without community. So to me, to see the church rise up and fill in that void is just a profoundly beautiful thing, and it's moving to see, and it's also inspiring to see a church that is unafraid. I think one of the things that is most encouraging for me is to see a church that is not afraid, not afraid to stand for what is true, not afraid to be the hands and feet of Jesus. I often think of how would Jesus respond during the pandemic. I don't like to say what would Jesus do, but like, would I do it to Jesus? Would I deny Jesus access to the church? Would I do this to Jesus? And I personally wouldn't. And I know I don't think Jesus would. Like you think of stories like Jesus embracing the leper. That guy had leprosy.
Yeah.
And Jesus, instead of saying 6 feet, buddy, slow down, he embraced him, and that to me is really, really beautiful. And it's a stark contrast to what unfortunately some of these churches are doing, and it's encouraging to see that your church is doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's beautiful to see that, and it's also sad to see that the voices of those that call themselves spirit filled would say otherwise. But we keep on pushing, we keep on believing that truth is going to prevail and win out in the end, and it will.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are scared. You touched on something too. You mentioned that like your church is not really afraid to get political, and I think there are a lot of churches that they absolutely are, and that to me is just kind of, I don't understand it.
Mhm.
I get that there's a divisiveness that comes with politics, but Jesus told us to go into all the world, and I don't think he meant, hey, politics not there, guys. That's
Well,
that's that's enemy territory. You can't go there.
right.
No, we're supposed to be a light in all the world, and that includes politics.
Mhm.
So that means talking about it. That means serving as members of representatives. That means holding public office. That means getting involved to the best of our ability, or doing what I'm doing, and talking about these things.
Yeah.
I don't think that's where it stops.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because a lot of people I've noticed, especially in this season where they're trying to keep the church out of politics, will use, and I saw this on one of your posts even today, that somebody said that there's a separation of church and state, right? And it's so funny. They, just like a lot of them misquote scripture, they're misquoting the actual meaning behind that as well. And most people will deny that this nation was founded on godly principles and biblical principles. And what we find is that that was written so that the government would not have overreach into the church, not the
Yes.
other way around. It was so that the government would not tell us that we can't sing in a church because we don't want to spread COVID. They didn't want to foresee a day where they could tell us they could lock us, in our homes and keep us from going to church, or send us to jail for even hosting.
Yeah, or requiring passports for the church. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where we should. That's where the separation of church and state is.
Hmm.
It's not to prevent someone like me to being a Christian in politics. Like no, that's not the truth. How do you even do that? How do you separate your beliefs? I don't know how you do that.
No.
And if somebody else can just easily do that, then I don't think you believe what you believe as much as you say you do.
Exactly. Or you haven't gotten to the part in the word where it talks about that specifically, because the word is clear.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. So there are other countries that have not fared as well as we have, and particularly Canada has been a little bit more Orwellian, in my opinion, and it's been kind of crazy over there. A pastor named Arthur Pawlowski has been arrested again for failing to comply with the restrictions
Mm.
and refusing to limit his church attendance. So I think this guy is heroic. I really do. I remember kind of one of the first videos that came out with him, and they're showing up at his door, and he's calling them the Gestapo and Nazis and telling them to leave and telling them they're not welcome. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
like we need this. And that, I don't know, it stirs you up. It encourages you. And he's willing clearly to risk it all, to keep his church doors open for people in need. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's amazing. Definitely, it gave me the obviously it's different scenarios, but it gave me the same kind of vibes as like Rosa Parks. You have to fight for what you believe in when you know something is wrong, despite other people, despite other people saying that what you're doing is wrong. And being arrested for the sake of hosting a service just blows my mind. It blows my mind. And we actually had to have a real conversation, my wife and I, when because right around this time we had our son in December of 2019. Then we had come January 2020, and then everything happens. And so we had to have a real discussion, and everything being more amplified here in California. Very similar to kind of like what you've seen develop in Canada and Australia, though we have we have the Constitution and our rights here, which I feel has been a great safeguard against a lot of the stuff that's been happening over there in those countries. We had to have a real conversation, like, hey, if this gets as bad as we're out past 9 p.m. and we get arrested, are you willing to get arrested? Are we willing to get arrested now that we have a son? Are we willing to, if it gets to that point, are we willing to go the extra mile to fight for what we believe in and stand up for truth? And we had that really raw, real conversation. I said, hey, if I get arrested, I don't know how long it'll take. We don't know what this looks like, to get out. If we both get arrested, here's the person that is going to have our kids and our child at the time.
Mm.
And we had to have that real conversation, just like this, this pastor probably did with his family, and he was willing to go that distance, as far as being, arrested for the sake of truth, for the sake of what he knew to be right. He knew that there were people out there that were broken, needed, community, needed Jesus, and he was willing to stand in the gap for them.
Yeah, man. It's sad and a little surreal that we even have to have conversations like that. And maybe some people watching this might be thinking, "Oh, you're hyperbolic. You're being, that can't happen here." Yeah, I didn't think a lot of things that are happening here could happen here, but yet they happened.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Occupy Democrats recently make a tweet about people in Canada being fined, actually fined for not getting vaccinated, and then they were talking about another country, I think Australia, and then they're like, retweet if you think the U.S. should do the same, and I'm like, what?
Mm-mm.
What? We're talking about fining people for not wanting to undergo a medical procedure?
Yeah.
Like, this is wild. This is just like and very one step closer to actually people being arrested. If you're getting fines and you can't pay them, what happens?
Yeah.
Yeah, what happens? You can get arrested. So you're being arrested for not getting a medical procedure.
Right. An experimental one at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's wild. And there might be an argument for, I mean, in my opinion, there really is no argument for the passports, but there might be an argument for them if they worked the way we were told they worked.
Right.
If they really stopped transmission, which we're discovering they absolutely do not.
Right.
They do not stop transmission. So unvaccinated person, a vaccinated person, they're no different. They spread it just as easily. And now it comes down to personal choice. Are you willing to risk maybe worse hospitalization? And I'm not so sure about that either.
Right. I mean, if that were the case, that's a personal choice that we are taking upon ourselves, and it won't. I mean, according to the data, won't affect somebody else any differently if they're vaccinated. And if you say otherwise, you're contradicting your own, your own beliefs on the matter. And my personal opinion, I don't think it's necessary for me and my family, to go undergo, this experimental drug, and get boosters at that. I've never in my life heard of getting multiple boosters within a year. It can't be good for you. It can't be good for your body to put all those, chemicals, metals, all that stuff. And people don't really take a look at what's inside the, the drugs and go deeper into it. They'll fall in line if your job's on the line. They'll fall in line if they say that they're going to find you $500 for, not getting vaccinated. Or if, to get into your next concert, you need to show a vaccine passport. People are so willing to be, instead of being uncomfortable, they'd rather move into that stage of, casual obedience than actually put aside some of their, desires, not going to that concert, or not walking out of that business that's requiring you to show a passport or wear a mask. People would rather have that, comfort than actually take a stand. And that's what's really interesting. And this is kind of exposed a lot of that.
Yeah. And I heard a really interesting quote. I forget who said it, but they said you can't comply your way out of tyranny. And I was like, that's absolutely true. They're just going to do more and more.
More and more.
So shifting gears a little bit. So the church is kind of going through its own issues. I think we're kind of, I personally believe we're living in kind of end times, or at least getting closer and closer. And I read an article recently about a pastor in a St. Luke's Lutheran church in Chicago recently put on a full drag performance in their Sunday service for a children's message. What do you think about that? That seems wildly inappropriate.
I honestly don't know how people in the church allow that to happen. That it just blows my mind that something like that can just continue to pass under the radar. Of course, they're going to get flack from news and whatnot, but then they continue to operate. People forget about it, but that stuff needs to be exposed. Honestly, it's a wolf in sheep clothing. And it's the word is clear. I mean, I looked into the story as well a little while ago, and the pastor considers himself to be a homosexual, and we're noticing that is rising up in the church a lot nowadays. There's a lot of people that consider themselves to be gay ministers, and we don't. My personal opinion on this, the Bible's clear, and I know it's your personal opinion as well because you read your word. A lot of people will try to alter their beliefs and skew the word to fit that narrative. And that's what we're seeing rise up in the church with these ministers that consider themselves to be gay. But, we don't see people, profess themselves as, I'm a thief pastor, I'm a lustful pastor. You don't call yourself by the sin. God has already made us righteous in his eyes. As long as we've accepted Jesus, we don't call ourselves by the sin anymore. God calls us by a different name. And so I was like reading out of Romans 12, and it says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And so we're not supposed to be conformed to this world. And what we're finding is that a lot of people are trying to are looking more. The church in a lot of areas is looking a lot more like the world. And it's really it's disheartening to see. But then it's also separating. It's separating the lukewarm from those that are on fire. And it's not hard to see anymore. You can walk in a church and see what they believe. Within the first few minutes, is the sermon, is it watered down? Are they dodging the truth a little bit? Are they afraid to offend? And that's why I love where I attend church. We're not afraid to speak truth. The word says it says it clearly. It's going to offend people. You're not going to be loved by people when you speak the word, when you speak of Jesus. And it just blows my mind. And in Titus 1:16, it says they profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. And it's clear. The word is clear. If you're leading your sheep, the congregation, astray with things like this, it's unbelievable that you would take that risk. You would take that risk with God, and stand before the judgment throne and say that you were doing his work.
We're supposed to be set apart. I mean, set apart in every single way, not conforming to the world, but being transformed by the word of God. Exactly. And this is what we're seeing. We're seeing people conforming to the ways of the world and letting this stuff into the church. And just for those of you listening, like I have the same stance on all sin. If the Bible says it's sin, I believe it's sin, and I believe our responsibility is to turn away from sin and encourage those who are listening to also turn away from sin. That's what repentance is. But we can't identify what sin is without his word. Right. And I think that's kind of one of the most heartbreaking things about our culture is that people aren't spending time reading his word because it's so plain and it's in there night as day. And I think how would Jesus react if he walked into this church and saw this happening? People think he would maybe lovingly embrace them, maybe not. Maybe he would see them desecrating a holy place and reacting much like the way he did to the Pharisees. Jesus is not tolerant of sin. He loves people, but he does not tolerate sin. And we know this come judgment day. What are we being judged for? Our works. And that is, very scary. And I don't want to see people on the other side of that judgment. I actually just shared a video not that long ago about a girl. She has a dissociative identity disorder, or she claims. And she's talking, dude, it's just wild, but she's talking about how she has like 30 other people living in her head, and this seems like a trend that's developing on TikTok, and my heart broke, man. Like seriously, it's broken because she is just one of many who are being indoctrinated by this propaganda and this push to normalize all this stuff. And she is totally losing herself, totally losing her identity to these lies. And one of the things that I discovered is when people identify with lies, the truth becomes a jarring thing for them. But like they cannot handle it because their entire identity, when you call it their sin, their entire identity is wrapped up in their sin. So it's very, very hard. And you get this visceral reaction, but nonetheless, we are supposed to preach what is true.
Right. Exactly. That's right.
So a couple other things I wanted to talk about. So Craig Rochelle, he's the pastor of Life Church, and they have campuses all over all over the country, probably the world now. And he's kind of known for helping develop the Bible app, which I'm very grateful for. The Bible app is amazing, and he's done some pretty incredible things. But now he's venturing into the metaverse, and I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I think like, oh yeah, that's a great tool to advance the gospel. On the other hand, I think like, well, now we're going into territory where it is completely under the thumb of whatever tech giant controls it, in this digital place. And a lot of people may not even really understand what the metaverse is. For those of you who don't know what it is basically a virtual world that's being created by Mark Zuckerberg, who now changed Facebook to Meta, hence the metaverse. And you can basically live in it like Avatar. So think of, if any of you have seen Ready Player One, that's exactly what they're making. And that to me is wild. So what do you think of the church's involvement in this?
Yeah. I feel like with the whole metaverse thing, it's like super early on right now. I was kind of reading into it, and though like Facebook is trying to spearhead a lot of that, a lot of companies are also trying to have some sort of, race to the finish line, so to speak, where they are the, that dominant company within that metaverse. And so it's interesting. Like you said, I have mixed feelings about it too. I hear a lot of people saying that, it's going to be akin to like the beast system or a part of that. And it's going to be a way to get people into like the, matrix kind of reality where they're sucked in and they can be controlled. And, I feel like it's just really early to tell with a lot of that kind of stuff, like what is going to come of the metaverse. As far as the church, like getting involved in the metaverse, just for my, surface level, being able to see into it right now, I feel like it might be a good opportunity for them to reach people that otherwise they would have never been able to reach. I don't know what that's going to look like. Maybe somebody's walking by this virtual church and they end up, walking in and getting saved. Like, I don't doubt that salvations can come from this. I don't doubt that lives can't be touched and transformed by this. But there's always a good, better, best option when it comes to anything in life. And so, the best option would be to get into a physical location, to get into a physical building with people, or even outside. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be in a building, but get into a community of individuals that are going to worship together, that are going to hear a word together, that are going to be able to do community and connect together. And if that's online at first, it's another avenue to reach people, but I don't think it's the end goal. It's a good mark, but there is that best mark as well. We even saw the disciples and going and starting these churches and actually, they weren't in the metaverse, right? They were starting physical.
Yeah.
They were helping people get into leadership and develop leaders and disciple. And I feel like that'd be very difficult to do online.
Yeah.
We do have online services. So, right, you have your good, better, best option. I feel like if I were to rate this on a scale, your good would be, the metaverse. Your better would be online service where you can see people, have a chat, do all that. Like you can actually see somebody's real smile and all that good stuff. And then your best would be in person. So I know that salvations and lives touched have come from, online church and the way that we traditionally do it nowadays. But that's a start. That's only a start for your walk, and I feel like it's an avenue for people to be reached, but it's definitely not the end all.
Yeah. I kind of felt the same way initially. I just started thinking about it a little bit more. My biggest problem with it is if it were God's platform, I don't think I would have an issue with it because it's God's platform. He's good, he's holy, he's just. But the entire basically everything about it is kind of predicated on a lie. And that's what's concerning about it. You never know who is the person that you're interacting with? You're interacting with a digital avatar, a representation of that person. And as you and I both probably know, people behave wildly online than they do in person. So, that's part of it too. How are these social media companies going to use those interactions against us? How are they going to exploit us? Because they most certainly are. And then the third thing is we have no idea or actually we're learning now how social media in general impacts people. And I think to myself, what we don't even fully understand this. We're seeing the results, the negative results, and we've seen it, especially among teen girls. It drive up suicide rates and drive up depression and drive up all these things. What would that be like in a virtual world? We have no idea. So I think, although I admire the pioneering spirit of the church, I think this is something we really need to understand before we jump in, because we have no idea what we're getting ourselves into, and we don't understand how our data is going to be used, and we just don't understand it well enough to just jump right in. And those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. And I did think about that as well. So like I said, I was just touching surface level, but there are a lot of complications that could arise from something like that, which is, like you mentioned, what if, who's behind that screen, how do you know? There's an aspect of hacking nowadays. Who's behind somebody's Twitter profile or Facebook profile? What if they tweet a message that pastor didn't intend or that leader didn't intend? What can something like that be done in the metaverse, but with avatars and with speaking and there's technology out there that would blow our minds. And the fact that we are going to be entering something like that on a platform where, like you said, is Facebook or Instagram, where we're already dealing with things like censorship. How much more can they do in something like that? If you're in your church building, there are no walls, so to speak, in the metaverse, despite what it looks like. So no, that's definitely a great point there. And there's I'm sure thousands and thousands of other complications and things to consider when doing something like that. But time will tell, and we'll see what happens.
So there's something else that I wanted to talk about. So I sent you this video of Pastor Michael Todd. He's a pastor of Transformation Church in Tulsa, and both you and I have lived in Tulsa for some time, so we're both pretty familiar with the area. He recently did a sermon illustration that involved him spitting in his hand and rubbing it on his, I believe the person is actually his brother's eyes. And he was doing this basically to illustrate that sometimes, things get, things can get gross, when you're involved with God, things can get hard. That was basically the crux of his illustration. I found it to be very disgusting. I'm just going to be honest with you. Just gross and unnecessary. I think he could have made this illustration without having to do that. I get it, the shock factor. I understand that, but it'd be one thing if the guy were actually blind. I get that, that would be amazing. And I don't think we'd be, but the guy wasn't blind. And that to me was kind of wild. What do you think?
I did see the video. My gosh, when I read the title, I was like, okay, I get how it could, an illustration. I get it, and it surface level. Then you see it happen. If you haven't seen the video, go watch the video. It's pretty hard to watch. I watched it and it got pretty gnarly and gross. But I would say, I was kind of reading some of the comments that people were saying, and it was very showy. It was very, this, that. And I know a lot of people that really like him, that watch him regularly in online church, and to each their own. It was just really hard to watch, and I don't know if that was the best illustration he could have made with that particular story, but it was definitely a hard one to watch, and he'll definitely think twice before doing something like that again, I bet. But
I hope so. I think there's this rise in these celebrity pastors, because Michael Todd is a pretty big name. A lot of people know who he is, and they just get kind of more, I guess, sensational in some of the things that they do. Where part of me questions, was he I don't even know, was he sincere? Was he doing this explicitly for the shock factor? Because honestly, we're talking about it, and a lot of people are talking about it, and it's getting eyes and attention onto his church, and it makes me think, like, I don't know, is that the
That
best thing
point
to do?
kind of thing. Yeah. No, it definitely was a shock factor, and he knew what he was doing was going to make people cringe and be shocked. His own congregation was gasping, and people were like, "No, no, no," and he was saying that that's how people would react in that time, like just anytime. Doesn't matter if it was in the time that Jesus walked the earth or now, like having somebody spit in their hand and wipe it on your face would make everybody around cringe. And so I think that was his point, but it was definitely a very dramatic version of that.
Yeah, if they could suddenly see.
Yeah.
If they could suddenly see, that's what made Jesus' miracle so profound. If Jesus just did it and nothing happened, people would be like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. What was that for?
What was that for? What was the point in that?
Right.
All right. One more thing I wanted to talk about. So recently there was a human pig heart transplant. So this man received a heart transplant from a genetically altered pig. This is something that has never been done before. What do you think about that? Do you think we're going too far?
Yeah, that's a tough one, honestly. Like, I do think that science at times is, trying to act as the hand of God, so to speak, and sometimes it can be very concerning what they're trying to do, and not to detract too much from it, but that like science is attempting to allow lesbian couples through bone marrow conceive. And sometimes you don't want to act like the hand of God in certain situations like this. Like, you don't want to mess with that kind of stuff. And when it kind of like bringing it back to the human, the pig heart transplant, like, do I think they're going too far? I would say, personally, from reading the story, it seemed like this was the guy's only last option. Like, he said he chose to go forward with the procedure because he would not have survived without getting a new heart, and had already gone through other treatments and was actually disqualified from receiving any other human heart. And so, I think if it came down to passing away due to heart complications versus having a genetically modified pig heart in there, it'd be a tough decision to make to die. And
Yeah.
so I understand, his reasoning and logic behind it, and glad it was successful and he's still alive. But it definitely is like, okay, what does that open the door for in the future?
Yeah.
Because the article that you're mentioning even talked about like. This opens the door for people to not have to wait for human hearts anymore. They can just continue to transplant pig hearts or any other animal hearts into humans, and that's not the end of the road. That
Yeah.
would be the end of the road. If you see something like that be successful, where does that stop?
Yeah. To me, I do think it goes too far, and it might sound harsh, but sometimes I think, and this is going to sound harsh, there's no way around it, but we all have an expiration date. It just is. And I think sometimes we try to prolong our life and we don't understand the unintended consequences of doing that. And I think things like pig transplants is just just the start. Like you said, I think like what are we going to have, chimera like human beings in the future? Like God, whether you believe in the Old Testament or not, or whether you believe in what is it, not the Old Testament, like Jewish customs or not, there was he was very serious about not mixing like clean and unclean things. And I think biblically, like pig specifically has been unclean, and there's this principle about mixing, mixing what God considers clean and unclean. And I think this is one of those scenarios which that's what you're doing and kind of playing God. And we've seen this backfire very recently. About 2 years ago, there was people in Wuhan, China, doing gain of function research, and that experiment went horribly wrong. And I think this could be kind of the same thing. Also, just things to think about. Specifically, we're talking about pig. Where did Jesus send demons? Like, these are just things like it just really, just ironic to me that the human, the first human heart transplant is a swine, is a pig.
Right.
And I don't know, and there's just all these other parallels I can make. So I do think it's going a little bit too far. I think like all of our days are numbered, and I think God can absolutely do a miracle. And two,
Right.
this brings into question, like, where's our dependency on?
Mhm.
Like, where's our dependency on? And do we really think like God would be okay with that? I don't know. I personally don't think he would, but we'll see.
Yeah,
We will
that's a
see.
good point. I mean, it's definitely, you raise great points with Old Testament and being clean and unclean. It's definitely something to consider. Obviously things like this weren't foreseen in biblical times, and I feel like a lot of the things that we do nowadays wouldn't have been even on the radar, like, for people. And so
Well, maybe they were.
maybe.
Maybe that's why God gives those instructions, and why he specifically does things. So you see like practices in the Old Testament of people having to essentially quarantine when they're sick, or they have bodily fluids for a couple of days. Why would he do that? It's not for no reason. It's because God sees this bigger picture that
Mhm.
maybe it's lost on some of us because we don't have like that understanding of the culture of the time.
Right.
you know so just some things to chew on.
For sure.
So my last question. So if you had one message that you wanted to communicate with the church in our current climate, what would it be? What would you say?
Um, from my experience, that's a great question. From my experience here in San Diego and what we've been doing here, I would love to encourage the rest of the church body that standing up for truth, standing up for the Word, God, and the congregation, the people of God, is important now more than ever. Because if we lose that, if we start to lose these smaller battles, um, we lose everything. If we give foothold in any area of our lives, that's contrary to the will of God, that's contrary to His Word, we are jeopardizing our testimony. We're jeopardizing our rights, our future, our kids, and their kids and generations to come. It's so standing for truth, standing for people, standing for God and His Word, and if the church doesn't do it, who will?
Yeah, no, I absolutely 100% agree. We have an absolute responsibility to the truth, and to stand firm for what is true. And I think people are thirsty for that. I think there are people that really want to know what is true, more than anything right now, because we're told a lot of lies every day.
Yeah.
Constantly being bombarded with them, where people just have this hunger and thirst for truth. And I'm so encouraged to hear that message, and to hear what your church is doing. And I appreciate you, Calvin. Thank you for coming on the show. And
Thanks for
I
having me.
yeah, man. And I hope for continued success with your church and your family. And I'd love to have you on again one day. And yeah, man, let's stay in
I
touch,
know
right?
what big moves have been made in San Diego and California. Hopefully, we have a different governor by then and no more mandates.
I hope so, man. I'll be praying for you guys. But you have yourself a blessed day, and thank you for coming on.
You too. Thanks, brother.